My name is Chloe Evans. I'm 31 years old, and I own a culinary enterprise that no one in my family ever cared to acknowledge. For as long as I can remember, they've waved off my ambitions in the food world, all while singing the praises of my sister Jessica, the doctor, and my brother Michael, the lawyer. Tonight, at the 65th birthday party for my mother Catherine, that dismissal reached its peak. Jessica, with a perfectly plastic smile, steered me away from the main family table. "We need this space for the important guests," she said, gesturing to a small, forgotten table in the corner where the waitstaff were taking their breaks. "You can sit with the staff." I bit back the wave of fury, holding on to a secret that she, and the rest of them, were completely oblivious to. Before I get into what unfolded next, do me a favor and let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Give this video a like and hit subscribe to see how this one birthday dinner changed absolutely everything. The tension with my family didn't just appear out of nowhere at my mom's party. It was brewed over years. Growing up in our large suburban Chicago home, my parents, Catherine and David Evans, had a very rigid blueprint for what constituted a successful life. In their universe, respect was earned through Ivy League degrees and time-honored professions. My father, a celebrated oncologist, and my mother, a history professor at the university, cultivated a home where academic prowess was the only currency with any real value. My sister Jessica, 3 years my senior, was the star pupil. She dutifully followed our father's path into medicine, graduating at the top of her class and eventually becoming a cardiologist. My brother Michael, 2 years younger than me, became the family's second point of pride when he graduated from law school and landed a position at a high-powered firm handling corporate litigation. Every family gathering was a showcase for Jessica's latest life-saving procedure or Michael's high-stakes legal battles. And then there was me. Since I was about 14, I was completely captivated by food. Not just eating it, but the entire craft, the atmosphere, the business of creating an experience. I'd lose entire weekends to cooking shows, turning our kitchen into my personal laboratory and devouring books on restaurant management. By the time I was 16, I had even launched a small catering service for neighborhood events. My parents saw all of this as a cute hobby, a little pastime to keep me occupied until I decided to get serious about a real future. "Chloe has always been the creative one," my mother would explain to relatives, her smile tight and never quite reaching her eyes. The unspoken part of that sentence hung in the air for everyone to understand. Unlike her siblings, who were actually accomplishing something. When I announced during my senior year of high school that I intended to go to culinary school instead of following the pre-med track they'd mapped out for me, the house practically imploded. My father stopped speaking to me for almost a month. My mother wept, as if I'd just declared I was joining a fringe cult. Jessica just stared at me with this baffling mix of pity and contempt. "You want to be a glorified cook?" she asked me one night, her voice dripping with disbelief. "Have you thought about how people will see you compared to us? Is that really the life you want?" Despite their united front of disapproval, I stood my ground. I got into the Culinary Institute of America with a partial scholarship and worked grueling night shifts to pay for the rest of it after my parents made it clear they wouldn't contribute a dime. While every one of Jessica's academic awards was celebrated with a fancy dinner and Michael was lauded for each debate team victory, my own graduation from culinary school earned me a single generic card from my parents. They didn't even show up for the ceremony. The decade that followed was a grind, but it was my grind, and it was rewarding. I climbed the ladder from line cook to sous chef, then to executive chef. I opened my first little bistro at 25. My family did attend the grand opening, but they spent the entire evening looking profoundly uncomfortable, offering unsolicited advice on backup careers for when the restaurant inevitably failed. That bistro turned a profit in 8 months. I poured every penny back into the business, opening a second spot 2 years later. Then I acquired a struggling local chain of upscale casual eateries, which I completely revitalized with fresh menus and a new management philosophy. By the time I was 28, I owned 7 successful restaurants across Illinois. By 30, my company, Harvest Hospitality, had expanded to 42 locations across the Midwest, with serious plans for national expansion. None of this made a dent in my family's perception of me. At best, they treated my career like a quirky little success story. At worst, especially in Jessica's view, they saw it as fundamentally less legitimate than their own careers. Sure, my restaurants were making money, but I wasn't saving lives or arguing landmark cases. When the invitation for my mother's 65th birthday dinner arrived, I felt that old, familiar cocktail of hope and dread. The party was to be held at the Grandview, an iconic fine dining establishment famous for its impeccable service and classic cuisine. The beautiful irony, which my family had no clue about, was that 3 months earlier my restaurant group had quietly acquired the Grandview and its sister properties as our first major step into the fine dining sector. I spent a small fortune on the perfect gift for my mother, a rare, signed first edition of her favorite novel. I picked out my outfit with surgical precision. A chic, dark green silk dress that whispered professionalism without shouting, paired with the simple pearl necklace my grandmother had left me. Driving to the restaurant, I let myself indulge in a little fantasy. Maybe this milestone birthday would soften them. Maybe, just maybe, my mother would finally look at me and see that my hobby had become a legitimate empire, one worthy of the Evans family name. That fragile little bubble of hope burst the second I stepped into the private dining room at the Grandview. The massive, circular table at the room's center was already buzzing with my family. My parents sat at the head, flanked by aunts, uncles, cousins, and my siblings with their partners. Jessica's husband, Mark, a plastic surgeon, was holding court with some anecdote that had the whole table roaring with laughter. Michael's fiancée, Sophie, was showing off her new engagement ring to a cousin. Jessica saw me first. She rose from her seat with that practiced, polished smile she reserved for people she deemed beneath her. At 34, my sister had our mother's sharp, elegant bone structure and our father's unwavering self-assurance. She was wearing a vibrant red dress that screamed successful doctor, her dark hair swept into an elaborate updo. "Chloe, you made it," she said, leaning in for an air kiss that didn't come within an inch of my cheek. Her eyes did a rapid, dismissive scan of my outfit. "Listen, we've actually run out of room at the main table. Hope you don't mind." She gestured vaguely toward a small two-top table tucked away near the swinging kitchen doors where 2 servers were quietly eating a pre-shift meal. There were 3 empty chairs, plain as day, at the family table. "Over there," I repeated, certain I must have misheard. "With the staff," Jessica confirmed, her smile never faltering. "We have to save these seats for Uncle Robert and Aunt Susan. They're running a bit late. And Cousin Elizabeth might pop in later." Before I could even form a protest, she had a firm hand on my arm, steering me across the room, away from our family. I made brief eye contact with my mother, who just gave me a little wave before turning back to her conversation with my father. No one else at the table even seemed to register that I was being escorted to the service corner like an unwanted guest. "You don't mind, do you?" Jessica continued in a low, conspiratorial whisper. "I mean, it's not like you're not used to being around restaurant staff, The subtle emphasis on the word staff was a clear, deliberate jab at my entire career. The two servers at the table glanced up, their faces a mixture of surprise and discomfort, as Jessica essentially deposited me into the empty chair. "This is my sister," she announced to them, using the same condescending tone she used to explain complex medical conditions to patients she considered simple-minded. "She works in food service too, so I'm sure you'll all have plenty to talk about." And with that, she spun on her heel and glided back to the main table, leaving me sitting with two complete strangers who looked as mortified as I felt. The young woman, whose name tag read Isabel, offered me a small, apologetic smile. "I'm so sorry about that," she said in a quiet voice. "Would you like us to find you another place to sit? I can go talk to the manager." "No, it's fine," I replied on autopilot, years of conditioning kicking in to minimize the sting of the insult. "Please, don't go to any trouble." The male server, Mateo, pushed a basket of bread toward me. "The sourdough is really fresh tonight," he offered kindly. Chef Dubois added some rosemary from our rooftop garden. I took a piece, even though my appetite had completely vanished. From my vantage point in the corner, I had a perfect, unobstructed view of my family carrying on, laughing and enjoying themselves without me. My mother was unwrapping a gift from my brother, her face lighting up with delight. My father raised his glass for a toast I couldn't hear. My Uncle Paul glanced my way once, a flicker of what looked like discomfort on his face, before he deliberately turned his attention back to the celebration. I considered making a scene. I could march over there, confront Jessica for her blatant attempt to humiliate me, and demand to be treated with a shred of dignity at my own mother's birthday. But what would that really accomplish? Decades of family dynamics had taught me that any emotional outburst would only solidify their image of me as the immature, less composed sibling. So instead, I sat there, picking at a piece of bread, trying to project an air of unbothered calm. Isabel and Mateo tried to make small talk, clearly attempting to diffuse the thick cloud of awkwardness. "How long have you been in the food service industry?" Isabel asked politely. "About 13 years now," I answered, deliberately keeping my response vague. I wasn't ashamed of my career, not for a second, but in that moment, trying to explain my actual role felt both pathetically boastful and deeply humiliating. "That's amazing," Mateo said. "I'm working my way through culinary school right now. I want to be a pastry chef one day." Under any other circumstances, I would have loved to talk to Mateo about his goals. At my company, I prided myself on mentoring young, aspiring chefs. But tonight, with the sound of my family's oblivious laughter echoing in the background, I could barely string a sentence together. I discreetly pulled out my phone and sent a text to my boyfriend, Leo. Guess who got seated at the kids' table? Except the kids are the restaurant staff. Leo, a tech founder who had dealt with his own fair share of family drama, replied almost instantly, "Are you kidding me? That's insane. Want me to come stage a rescue mission?" "No," I typed back, "but Arthur is supposed to stop by tonight. This should get interesting. Take pictures of their faces when they find out who you are. Love you. You're worth a dozen of them." Leo's message was a small anchor in the storm. We'd been together for 2 years, and he was the one person who had seen firsthand both the scale of my professional success and the depth of my family's dismissal of it. Unlike my relatives, Leo saw my work as groundbreaking and impressive. His encouragement had been a lifeline during the recent stressful expansion of my company. From my little island of exile, I watched my family with a new, detached clarity. Jessica was running the show, directing the servers, deciding the order of gift opening, and dominating every conversation. Her husband Mark was her willing second in command. My brother Michael kept checking his watch, his face etched with the expression of a man who had more important places to be. And my mother, the supposed guest of honor, seemed perfectly happy to let Jessica orchestrate the entire evening. Snippets of their conversation drifted over to me. They were discussing Michael's latest win in court, Jessica's thoughts on opening a private practice, and our cousin Rachel's acceptance into medical school. Not once did I hear my name. Not once did anyone look over and seem to notice or care about my absence from the table. Mateo came back after serving the main course to my family. "Your sister asked for the wine list again," he told me, his voice carefully neutral. "She said the Bordeaux wasn't properly decanted." I winced. Jessica's wine expertise was limited to name-dropping a few expensive labels. I hope she wasn't rude about it. Mateo gave a diplomatic shrug. "We get all kinds. Personally, I think the Bordeaux is drinking beautifully tonight." Isabel returned from delivering a plate of specially prepared, gluten-free bread to my mother. "Your mom seems nice," she offered. She actually thanked me. Unlike some others at that table, I just nodded, a lump forming in my throat. My mother wasn't intentionally cruel like Jessica could be. She was just oblivious, her passivity a different kind of weapon. She had never once stood up for me, never championed my choices, but she would thank a server for doing their job. After about 30 minutes at the staff table, I excused myself to the restroom, needing a moment to pull myself together. In the ridiculously opulent bathroom of the Grand View, I leaned against the cool marble counter and took a few deep, shaky breaths. The woman staring back at me in the mirror looked poised, but I could see the deep hurt in her eyes. For a fleeting moment, I thought about just leaving. I could just slip out, send my mom a text in the morning with a vague excuse about not feeling well. It would be so much easier than sitting through another hour of this slow-motion humiliation. But then, as I splashed cold water on my face, I remembered the thick stack of papers I had signed 3 months ago. The Grand View wasn't just some random restaurant. It was mine. The acquisition had been kept under wraps at the request of the previous owner, Arthur Vance. He had been the public face of the restaurant for over 2 decades and wanted a graceful exit. We'd agreed to officially announce the change in ownership next month. After all the legal loose ends were tied up, Arthur had stayed on as a managing partner during the transition, while my team had already started implementing subtle but significant improvements to the menu and operations. Almost no one outside of my executive team and his knew I was the new owner. I pulled out my phone and called Emily, my executive assistant. "Chloe, aren't you supposed to be at your mom's birthday dinner?" she asked, surprised. "I am. Listen, is Arthur still planning to stop by tonight like we discussed?" "Yes," he confirmed this afternoon. "He said he wanted to introduce you to some of the regulars who are dining tonight. Is everything okay?" I let out a soft, humorless laugh. "Not exactly. My loving sister has me seated at the staff table while the rest of the family celebrates." Emily gasped. "She did not." "Chloe, that's awful." "Standard Jessica behavior," I replied, a weariness in my voice. "Look, when Arthur gets here, don't have him paged or sent to the table. Just let him find me on his own. I think it's time my family discovered my position here, organically." "Understood," Emily said, a note of grim satisfaction in her voice. She had been on the receiving end of enough of my family's condescending phone calls to appreciate the impending justice. I hung up, reapplied my lipstick, and squared my shoulders. I had built a multi-million-dollar empire through sheer grit, smart decisions, and a genuine passion for hospitality. If my own family couldn't see my worth, that was their problem. Plenty of other people did. I walked back to the staff table with a newfound sense of resolve. Isabel had been called away to another table, but Mateo was still there, now joined by a young hostess named Lauren. "Everything all right?" Mateo asked, picking up on my change in demeanor. "Much better, thank you," I replied with a real smile. "Tell me more about your pastry program. What techniques are you working on right now?" As Mateo launched into an enthusiastic description of his struggles with perfecting the French macaron, I watched my family with a new sense of objectivity. Jessica was now standing behind my mother, micromanaging the gift opening like a conductor leading an orchestra. She dictated which gift to open next, made the appropriate oohs and ahs, and occasionally barked orders at her husband, Mark, who scurried to do her bidding. My father sat slightly apart from the festivities, nursing a glass of scotch and nodding along to something my uncle was saying. Michael had his arm around his fiancée, but his eyes were glued to his phone, hidden just below the tabletop. From this distance, the whole scene seemed less intimidating and more pathetic. Jessica's desperate need for control, Michael's complete disengagement, my parents' rigid, outdated ideas of success. It all screamed of limitation, not achievement. Mateo finished his story, and Lauren started sharing her own ambitions to get a degree in hospitality management. I listened, offering bits of advice without giving away my position. The industry can be brutal, I acknowledged, but if you have a real passion for it and you're willing to learn every single part of the business, the opportunities are incredible. Lauren nodded, her eyes bright. "That's what I keep telling my parents. They want me to major in accounting because it's more practical. But I just love the energy of this world. Parents don't always get it when you choose an alternative path," I said, unable to keep a sliver of bitterness from my voice. Before we could continue, Jessica marched over to our table. She was wearing that tight-lipped expression I knew from childhood, the one that always preceded a lecture. "Chloe," she said sharply, "Mom is about to cut her cake. Could you at least try to join us for that? And maybe try to look a little less miserable about being here. Everyone is noticing your sulking." Mateo and Lauren suddenly found the contents of their water glasses incredibly fascinating. "I wasn't aware I was invited to the main table," I replied, my voice steady and even. "You made it pretty clear where I was supposed to sit when I got here." Jessica rolled her eyes. "Oh, don't be so dramatic. There wasn't enough room earlier, that's all. There were 3 empty chairs. They were reserved," she snapped. "So are you coming for the cake or not?" I held her gaze, refusing to be cowed. "I'll come over when it's time. Thank you for the invitation." She turned to leave, then paused. "By the way, the service here is slipping. My water glass was empty for at least 10 minutes. Maybe you could mention that to your new friends, since you're all getting so chummy." After she stomped away, Mateo let out a quiet whistle. "Family, huh? Sometimes the people who are supposed to love you the most are the ones who know exactly where to stick the knife." "Sounds like you're speaking from experience," I observed. He nodded. "My dad never approved of me wanting to be a chef. He wanted me to take over his construction business. We barely speak anymore." Our brief moment of connection was cut short by a sudden change in the room's atmosphere. The entire staff seemed to stand a little straighter, their faces becoming more alert, more professional. I knew exactly what that meant, even before I turned my head to look. Arthur Vance had arrived. Arthur Vance swept into the private dining room with the kind of confident air that had made him a legend in the Chicago restaurant scene. At 65, he was still an impressive figure, with a full head of silver hair, a perfectly tailored suit, and an energy that belied his age. Servers nodded at him with deep respect as he passed, and diners at other tables smiled in recognition. I watched as he surveyed the room, his gaze sweeping past my family's table before it locked onto me. A huge, genuine smile spread across his face as he changed his course and headed directly for the staff table in the corner. "Boss!" he boomed, his voice warm and loud enough for everyone in the room to hear clearly. "What on earth are you doing hiding back here with the staff? I've been looking all over for you." Mateo and Lauren froze, their expressions flickering from confusion to utter shock as they tried to process Arthur's words. I could feel the collective gaze of the entire room, including my family's table, swiveling toward us, but I kept my eyes fixed on Arthur as he approached. "Hello, Arthur," I said calmly, standing to accept his firm, enthusiastic handshake. "Just getting to know some of your excellent team members." "Our team members now," he corrected with a theatrical wink, though I admit I keep forgetting that. Old habits die hard after running the show for 25 years. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Jessica, her champagne flute suspended halfway to her lips, her face a mask of confusion. My mother looked puzzled. My father was frowning deeply. Michael had actually put his phone down. Arthur turned to Mateo and Lauren, who were still staring at me as if I'd grown a second head. Has our illustrious new owner been keeping her identity a secret? That's classic Chloe. Always wants to understand the operation from the ground up before she reveals herself. "Owner?" Lauren repeated, her voice barely a whisper. Arthur let out a hearty laugh. "That's right. Chloe's company, Harvest Hospitality, acquired the Grandview and our other restaurants 3 months ago. Best decision I ever made, selling to someone who truly understands the art of fine dining. This woman has been revolutionizing restaurants all over the Midwest." He turned back to me. "By the way, the supply chain adjustments your team recommended have already boosted our margins by 7%. Absolutely brilliant." By this point, the silence from the family table was so absolute, it was practically a physical presence. I finally allowed myself to look over at them. My mother's mouth was hanging open in a perfect O of astonishment. My father was scowling, as if trying to solve an impossible puzzle. Michael looked genuinely, undeniably impressed, for the first time in my entire adult life. And Jessica's face had drained of all color. She set her champagne glass down with a hand that was visibly shaking, her expression a rapid-fire sequence of disbelief, mortification, and dawning horror. "Boss," Arthur continued, blissfully unaware of the family drama he had just detonated, "this simply will not do. Your table should be the best in the house. Mateo, please help me make arrangements at once." Mateo, still reeling, snapped to attention. "Yes, sir. Yes, Miss Evans." Arthur placed a hand on my shoulder. "I came by specifically because I wanted to introduce you to the Richardsons. They've been regulars for 15 years, and they're dining in the main room tonight. They would be absolutely thrilled to meet the new owner." He finally seemed to notice my family, all staring at us with wide eyes. "Oh, are you here with guests? Please allow me to rearrange things so you can all sit together properly." Before I could even respond, Arthur was already striding toward the family table, his hand extended to my father. "Good evening, I'm Arthur Vance, the managing partner of the Grandview. You must be Chloe's family. She's been far too modest about her accomplishments, hasn't she?" Acquiring our restaurant group was just her latest triumph. The look on Jessica's face was worth every single second of the humiliation I had endured earlier. She looked physically ill, the carefully constructed narrative of her unsuccessful little sister crumbling to dust right before her eyes. My mother was the first to find her voice. "Chloe owns this restaurant?" she asked faintly. "This one?" "This one and 41 others across the Midwest," Arthur confirmed proudly. Your daughter is something of a prodigy in this industry. Forbes magazine named her one of their 30 under 30 last year. Surely you saw the feature." My father cleared his throat. "I believe we missed that one," he said stiffly. Arthur looked genuinely baffled. "Well, that's a shame. Harvest Hospitality has been outperforming major national chains in both growth and customer satisfaction. The Grandview is merely the newest jewel in her crown." Jessica had recovered just enough to attempt some damage control. "How interesting," she said, her smile brittle. "Chloe has always been so secretive about her work. We had no idea she was involved in such a significant operation." Arthur chuckled. "Secretive? She was profiled in the Wall Street Journal and the Chicago Tribune. The acquisition of our restaurant group was on the front page of the business section 3 months ago." I finally stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on Arthur's arm. "Arthur, thank you for the glowing introduction. My family and I were just celebrating my mother's 65th birthday." "A milestone!" Arthur exclaimed. "Well, this calls for our finest vintage champagne. On the house, of course. Though I suppose that technically means it's on you." He laughed at his own joke. "Let me have the staff rearrange the tables to accommodate everyone properly." "That's really not necessary," I began, but Arthur was already summoning the maitre d' and issuing a flurry of instructions. Within minutes, the staff had seamlessly expanded the main table, adding an elegant place setting for me right at the head, in the position of honor beside my mother. As I took my seat, the executive chef, Chef Dubois, emerged from the kitchen. "Miss Evans, Arthur told me you were dining with us tonight," he said, his voice filled with genuine warmth. "I've prepared a special dessert course for your mother's celebration, a variation on the chocolate lava cake you suggested during our menu planning session last month." My mother turned to me, her face a mask of bewilderment. You helped plan the menu here?" "Miss Evans has been instrumental in refining our entire culinary direction," Chef Dubois explained. "Her idea to incorporate more locally sourced, seasonal ingredients has been brilliant for both our quality and our cost control." As the chef returned to his kitchen, a heavy, uncomfortable silence descended on the table. My relatives just exchanged wide-eyed glances, all of them clearly struggling to reconcile the person they thought I was with this new reality. Jessica seemed to be physically shrinking in her chair, while her husband, Mark, suddenly became fascinated by the weave of his napkin. After 13 years of being dismissed and condescended to, the tables had, quite literally, been turned. I was no longer the family's quirky disappointment. I was the successful businesswoman whose flagship restaurant they had unknowingly chosen for their special occasion. The delicious irony of it all was not lost on a single person at that table. The only question now was what would happen next, in the wake of this dramatic, irreversible shift in our family's power dynamic. The staff at the Grandview served dessert with flawless efficiency, their movements a masterclass in professional grace. My mother's birthday dessert, a molten chocolate cake, arrived with a single, elegant candle, flanked by the chef's assortment of handcrafted truffles and macarons. As the family sang happy birthday, their voices ranging from enthusiastic to deeply subdued, I noticed the subtle shift in how the servers now interacted with me. Isabel, who had been so kind at the staff table, now addressed me as Miss Evans and seemed nervous when refilling my water. Mateo maintained his friendly air, but added a respectful ma'am to every sentence. The entire dynamic of the room had changed, and not just with my family. Once the song was over and my mother had blown out her candle, Jessica made a valiant attempt to reclaim control. She raised her champagne flute to Mom, still fabulous at 65, and to Chloe for her surprising business success. The toast was so awkward, it only served to amplify the tension in the room. I just smiled politely and took a sip of my champagne, letting the uncomfortable silence hang in the air. After years of being interrupted and ignored, I felt no obligation to rescue them from this moment. Finally, Michael broke the stalemate. "So, Chloe," he said, leaning forward with a completely new kind of interest in his eyes. "How many restaurants did Arthur say you own now?" 42, including the Grandview. We're opening new locations in Minneapolis and Detroit next quarter. That's impressive, Michael conceded, sounding genuinely stunned. "What's your annual revenue?" Jessica shot him a look that clearly said, "Don't ask." But for once, my brother ignored her. His lawyerly curiosity about the bottom line was finally working in my favor. "We crossed 90 million last fiscal year," I replied calmly. "Projections for this year are around 120 million with the new acquisitions." My father nearly choked on his cake. "Million?" he repeated, as if the word were foreign. "Yes, Dad. Million." I took another slow sip of champagne, savoring the moment. The hospitality industry can be quite profitable if it's managed correctly. Mark, Jessica's husband, tried to break the tension with a weak joke. "Well, I guess we know who's picking up the check tonight." No one laughed. My mother set down her fork, her dessert barely touched. "Chloe, why didn't you ever tell us about any of this?" The question was loaded, and everyone at the table knew it. Was she asking why I hadn't told them? Or was she really asking why they had never bothered to listen? "I've tried to share my work with you all many times," I replied, my voice even. "At Christmas 2 years ago, I mentioned we were expanding into the Milwaukee market." Jessica immediately changed the subject to her hospital's new cardiac wing. "Last Thanksgiving, I was talking about hiring a James Beard award-winning chef for our Chicago flagship. Dad cut me off to ask Michael about his caseload. My Uncle Robert, who had been uncharacteristically quiet all evening, cleared his throat. "To be fair, Chloe, I think I did hear something about your restaurant group. There was an article in the Business Chronicle a while back." "Yes," I confirmed. "When we acquired the Grandview Group, it was covered by several major publications." "I meant to ask you about it," he continued, a note of apology in his voice, "but it just slipped my mind." Jessica, clearly agitated by her fall from the top of the family pedestal, tried to steer the conversation back to safer territory. "Well, this is all fascinating, but perhaps we should be focusing on Mom's birthday, not Chloe's business dealings." "Actually," my mother interjected with a firmness I hadn't heard from her in years, "I would like to hear more about Chloe's work. It seems I've been missing quite a lot." Jessica's mouth tightened into a thin line, but she said nothing. "What would you like to know, Mom?" I asked gently. "Everything," she replied, her voice soft. "How did you build all of this? When did it get so big?" For the first time in my adult life, my mother was looking at me with genuine, unadulterated curiosity, not polite tolerance. So I decided to tell her the whole story, the one my family had never once bothered to ask for. "After I graduated, I went to work for Chef Julien Rousseau at Le Ciel," I began. "I was his sous chef within 2 years. When I opened my first restaurant, the Harvest Table, I used a business plan I had been writing and rewriting since I was 22. We broke even in 6 months, which is almost unheard of in this business. As I walked them through my journey, I could see their expressions shifting. Michael started asking sharp, specific questions about my business structure and investment strategies. My father, initially skeptical, began to nod with what looked like reluctant approval when I started talking about profit margins and expansion metrics. My mother's eyes welled up with tears when I described the 16-hour days and 7-day work weeks of the early years. You did all of that while we thought you were just... She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Just a cook, I supplied softly. Just wasting my potential. Just avoiding a real career. She winced at my words. We never understood what you were building. You never tried to understand, I corrected, my tone gentle but firm. There's a difference. Jessica shifted in her seat. In all fairness, Chloe, you could have been a bit more forthcoming about the scale of your success. Would it have made a difference, I asked, meeting her gaze head-on. 2 years ago, at Christmas dinner, I told everyone my restaurant group had just opened its 15th location. You immediately changed the subject to ask Michael about his new car. I don't remember that, Jessica protested weakly. I do, Michael admitted, having the grace to look ashamed. I remember thinking 15 restaurants sounded like a lot, but I guess I just assumed they were small cafes or something. I never followed up. I'm sorry, Chloe. Mark, perhaps sensing a chance to get on his newly powerful sister-in-law's good side, chimed in. You know, Chloe, I actually took some clients to one of your restaurants last month, the Porterhouse Steakhouse in Naperville. The service was absolutely impeccable. Thank you, Mark. That location won a regional award for customer experience last quarter. I turned my attention back to Jessica. Actually, you've eaten at my restaurant several times without even knowing it. That anniversary dinner you and Mark had at Azul last year, that's one of mine. The little bistro near your hospital, Crescent Cafe, also mine. Jessica's face flushed a deep red. How was I supposed to know that? They don't have your name on them. Most major restaurant groups don't put the owner's name on the front door, I explained patiently. But the information is on our website, in industry journals, and is easily found with a simple Google search. My mother reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. I am so proud of what you've accomplished, Chloe, and I am so ashamed that we never saw it until now. Her words, the very words I had been craving for over a decade, should have filled me with pure triumph. Instead, they just underscored how much I had missed out on, having to build my dream entirely without my family's support. Thank you, Mom, I said quietly. That means a lot to hear. As the dinner plates were cleared, the conversation continued to revolve around my business, something that would have been unimaginable just a few hours earlier. My relatives peppered me with questions that revealed both their newfound fascination and their profound ignorance of my life's work. It wasn't lost on me that it took a public spectacle from a respected outsider to make them finally see me as successful. When the evening began to wind down, Eleanor surprised everyone by standing up to make an impromptu speech. I want to thank all of you for being here tonight, she began. 65 years is a long time, and I'm grateful for every one of you. She paused, her eyes finding mine across the table. But I need to acknowledge something. I think that as parents, David and I have been far too narrow in our definition of success. Tonight has been eye-opening. Diana stiffened, but Michael nodded slowly. Chloe, my mother continued, her voice thick with emotion. I am so sorry that we haven't given your career the respect it deserves. I'm sorry that we needed someone else to tell us how successful you are before we could see it for ourselves. That is our failure, not yours. As my mother's words settled over the room, I felt a tangled mess of vindication and lingering pain. The apology was real, but it couldn't magically erase years of being made to feel small. The road to any kind of real family healing was going to be long and complicated. As the party wound down, guests started to say their goodbyes. My aunt and uncle hugged me with a newfound warmth. My cousin asked for a business card, suddenly curious about job opportunities. Michael lingered, asking more detailed questions about my corporate structure, while his fiancée, Jacqueline, complimented the restaurant's decor repeatedly. I accepted their sudden attention with grace, though I couldn't help but wonder how the night would have gone if Arthur had never shown up. Would I still be sitting at the staff table, invisible to my own family? My parents got ready to leave. My father awkwardly mumbled something about us getting lunch to discuss my business ventures. My mother hugged me tightly, whispering another apology into my ear. I hugged her back, our relationship too frayed to be fixed in a single moment. As the room emptied out, only Jessica remained. She approached me, her expression carefully neutral, but I could see the conflict raging in her eyes. "Can we talk for a second?" she asked, gesturing toward a quiet corner. I nodded and followed her. For a long moment, we just stood there in silence, two sisters with a lifetime of rivalry and misunderstanding between us. "I had no idea," Jessica finally said, her voice tight, "about the scope of it all, about your success." "You never asked," I replied simply. "You could have told us," she shot back, a defensive edge in her tone. "You could have made it clear what you were building." "And would that have changed how you treated me?" I asked, my voice soft but firm. "Or would you have just found new ways to diminish my career because it wasn't medicine?" Her perfectly manicured nails tapped an agitated rhythm against her empty glass. "That's not fair. We all thought you were just working in restaurants, not owning them. There's a big difference. The fact that you think ownership is the only thing that makes it worthy of respect is the entire problem," I said. "Even if I were just an executive chef at a great restaurant, that's a legitimate, difficult, and respectable career." "Don't twist my words," she snapped. "I'm trying to say we misunderstood your position." "No, you misunderstood my entire industry," I corrected. "And you spent the last 13 years treating me like the family failure because my path was different from yours. Tonight, you deliberately humiliated me by seating me with the staff. What was that, if not a clear message?" Her composure finally cracked. Her shoulders slumped. "Maybe I did," she admitted, her voice dropping to a whisper. "And I'm sorry. It was petty. It was childish." The apology was so unexpected it threw me off balance. In our 3 decades as sisters, I could count on one hand the number of times Jessica had ever admitted to being wrong. "Why?" I asked, the question raw. "Why was it always so important for you to keep me down?" She looked away, staring at the wall as if the answer were written on the wallpaper. "You don't understand the pressure," she said quietly. "Being the oldest, the one who had to set the standard. When you decided to go to culinary school, everyone talked about how charming it was that you were following your passion. No one ever asked me if I was following my passion." "You love being a doctor," I said, confused. "I do," she conceded, "but it was also what was expected. It was the only path presented as valid. Watching you just break away and choose your own thing. A part of me was jealous, and when it looked like you were struggling in what I saw as a second-rate career, it was easier to feel superior than to admit I was envious." "I was never struggling," I told her. "I was working incredibly hard, but my business has been successful from the very beginning. You just never bothered to look closely enough to see it." She nodded slowly. "That's fair. I should have paid more attention. I should have asked more questions." We stood in silence again, the weight of our history hanging between us. "So where do we go from here?" she finally asked. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "One dinner doesn't erase years of being dismissed. I need you to understand that your behavior has caused real damage." "I understand," she said, her voice sincere, "and I want to do better. Not because you own a bunch of restaurants, but because you're my sister." The sincerity in her voice gave me a flicker of hope. Still, I was cautious. Actions will matter more than words, I told her. I'm willing to try, but I need respect. Not for my balance sheet, but for the work I do. She nodded. I can try. When we rejoined the others, the atmosphere had completely changed. As we gathered for a final family photo, I noticed a subtle but significant shift. Instead of being pushed to the edge, I was guided to stand directly behind my mother, with Jessica and Michael on either side of me, forming a united front that had never existed before. To new beginnings, my mother said as the waiter took the photo, and to seeing each other clearly. As the camera flashed, I felt a complex wave of emotions. Vindication, yes, but also a lingering sadness for all the lost years. It was a start. As my family finally left, my mother pulled me aside. I would love to see your main office sometime, she said tentatively. I want to understand what you've built. I'd like that, Mom, I replied. How about next week? Perfect, she said, her eyes bright. After they were gone, Arthur came over with a knowing smile. Family can be a complicated thing, can't it? He observed. I hope tonight brought some resolution. It's a beginning, I said, and thank you for your impeccable timing. He laughed. Purely a coincidence, I assure you. But I have to admit, the look on your sister's face when I called you boss was priceless. Before I left, I stopped by the kitchen to thank the staff. Matteo looked up from his station with a grin. So that's why you knew so much about the business, he said. You're literally the boss. I smiled. I try to understand every part of my restaurants. Your insights tonight were really valuable. Glad I didn't say anything too embarrassing, he joked. Though I stand by my comment about your sister. We both laughed, a moment of honest connection, and I realized that some of the most real interactions I'd had were with people who saw me clearly from the start, unlike my family, who needed a public spectacle to finally open their eyes. 1 week later, I stood in the executive offices of Harvest Hospitality, watching my mother take in the full scope of my operation. The 34th floor space had stunning views of the Chicago skyline, but her attention was on the awards lining the walls and the hum of my staff moving through the open plan office. This is extraordinary, Chloe, she said, genuine awe in her voice. I had no idea. This is just the corporate headquarters, I explained, leading her through the test kitchen, the marketing department, and finally to my corner office. You've built an empire, she murmured, running her fingers along the spines of the business books on my shelves. All while, we thought you were just cooking. I do still cook, I told her. I test every signature dish myself. But yes, my role is mostly executive now. She sank into a chair, looking weary. I keep thinking about all the times we dismissed you, all the condescending remarks. How did you put up with it all? I thought for a moment. I focused on building something I was proud of. I hoped that eventually you'd see it. And if you didn't, I shrugged. I still had the satisfaction of knowing I'd created something successful on my own terms. Validation from my family couldn't be my only measure of success. Her eyes filled with tears. I'm sorry we made you feel like you had to do it alone. Your father and I were so locked into our definition of achievement, we couldn't see the incredible businesswoman you were becoming. Different paths can lead to success, Mom, I said gently. That's all I ever wanted you to understand. As if on cue, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Jessica. She wants to reach out, to try and repair things, my mom said. I looked at the text, feeling a mix of wariness and hope. It wouldn't be easy. Rebuilding trust takes time. But as my boyfriend Leo's supportive message came through right after, I knew I was no longer the young woman desperate for her family's approval. My success wasn't measured by their recognition. It was measured by the integrity with which I lived my life and ran my business. I smiled and texted Jessica back. How about coffee next week? Tuesday at 2? The Crescent Cafe near your hospital. It's one of mine, but I promise, the coffee is excellent. The journey was just beginning, but for the first time it felt like we were all finally heading in the same direction. Have you ever been underestimated by the people closest to you, only to finally have them see your true worth? I'd love to read your stories in the comments below. Sometimes the greatest success is proving wrong the people who never believed in you in the first place. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button, subscribe to hear more true life experiences, and share this with anyone who needs a reminder that success comes in all shapes and sizes. Remember, true validation has to come from within. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.